So we'll take it up from where we were on Friday, and we were looking at Robert Axelrod's Prisoner's Dilemma games ran in the 1980s, where he set up computer contests and said to individuals, submit a computer program that basically replicates your strategy. If faced with a prisoner's dilemma type situation, what do you think is the best strategy to adopt? So we ran the competition first off and got 14 submitted entries, and also included the entry random. And the winner was tit for tat. That the winning strategy was cooperate in the first move, i.e. be nice, and then reciprocate or repeat what your rival does in the previous move in each subsequent move. So it's tit for tat. Whatever you did last, I'll do this time. But it starts off being nice. So he ran a second round of the competition. He kind of augmented it slightly. The first round was fairly basic, and one of the basic issues was in the first round is that it had a known ending point. That some of the strategies were actually devised around the fact that the game ran for 200 iterations. It was a person sitting playing the golden balls game 200 times in a row. So they actually figured out, what should I do given the fact that it runs 200 times in a row? What should I do in each particular iteration? What he did the second time round was that he gave it an uncertain ending point, that people didn't know how long it would last. So there was a certain probability of each iteration being the final one, and that was 0.00346. So each time there was a game, there was about 1/3 of 1% of a chance that that was the last. So on average there'd be about maybe 280, 290 iterations, but some could go far higher towards 400, some could be far lower towards 200. But it was within that particular range. So now people weren't devising, what would I do with a known ending point? It was an unknown ending point. So this time he got 62 entries. So we got entries from most of the original 14. Some of them didn't come back. They were hammered so badly they decided to pack it in. He got a few extra ones, and he also then included random. The strategy was just jump from one to the other on a random basis. Could do 10 cooperates in a row, then hop from one to the other for 15 moves, then could do 5 defects in a row. Again, the winner turned out to be the simplest strategy. Tit for tat. Cooperate in the first move, and then reciprocate your rival's actions after that. And again, submitted by Anatol Rappaport. So quite a short strategy, 4 lines of code. What do I do? Cooperate first, and then just see what the person did in the previous iteration. Again, looking at the strategies, he divides them up and say, well, where are particular strategies located? What Axelrod found was that 14 of the top 15 strategies never defect first, i.e. it pays to be nice. So what Axelrod defined as nice strategies, those strategies which don't defect first, scored highest. Again, they might not have been beating too many opponents, just as we looked at the contrast between tit for tat from Rappaport and the strategy submitted by Gordon Tulloch. Gordon Tulloch was beating almost half of his opponents, but he was beating them in very low scoring games. So his profits or payoffs were low, even though he was defeating opponents. Tit for tat by Rappaport was beating nobody. In fact, it can't beat anybody. It is mathematically impossible for it to beat somebody, unless it comes up with against a completely benign strategy. But it's unlikely that tit for tat will win because it can't take advantage of anybody. It cooperates first and then just reciprocates what the other person does. So tit for tat can't beat anybody, but is involved in higher scoring games. The payoffs are higher because of the cooperation. So being nice, so 14 of the top 15 strategies never defect first. They didn't try to take advantage of people. Whereas what Axelrod found was that 14 of the bottom 15 strategies were not nice. So these were, in a sense, what you might call smarter strategies, smarter in inverted commas, that try to take advantage of nicer strategies. And they may have beaten many of their opponents. So on a comparison basis, these people down here were beating their opponents, but on a profits or payoff basis, they were doing less well than the nicer strategies. And he also found again that forgiveness was important. You don't want to get caught up in a costly feud. That if somebody does take advantage of you, well, tit for tat, retaliate, but don't let it extend and continue into an extended feud. So the analysis that Axelrod did, and this was extended in by others looking at his work, when looking at cooperation, and was incorporated by Richard Dawkins into his book The Selfish Gene, or back in the 70s, Dawkins had looked at sort of species survival. He's sort of trying to extend the work of Charles Darwin, looking at evolution and origin of species. Dawkins said that only the strongest survive, only the most selfish survive. But here was Axelrod saying, well, no, nice, non-selfish, cooperating strategies can survive. So Dawkins upgraded his work to include some of the findings of Axelrod. So the key issues when looking at the findings of the second tournament was first to be retaliatory, be nice, cooperate first, but don't be too nice. If somebody does make an attempt to make a pay from you, if they tend to defect while you're cooperating, you shouldn't just say, oh, there's benefits to cooperation, I'll go back and cooperate again. And if someone does try to take advantage of you, you're retaliatory. So some entries try to take advantage of nice strategies, those which started cooperating. So there was tranquilizer. So cooperate first, then if the other cooperates too, throw in a few defections. Basically soothe them into a false sense of security. Tranquilize or soothe them, and then every so often throw in a defection to capture the payoff from defection, the incentive to cheat. There's tester, which this instance is defect first, and then if the other doesn't retaliate, cooperate twice, and then simply alternate defection and cooperation. If the other ever defects, do tit for tat. So the issue is to try to take advantage of the person early. If they start cooperating, well, tester will defect first. Try to make the gains early in the play. Again, what happens with strategies that aren't nice is that if they come up with other strategies that aren't nice, they get locked into a feud. So defecting first, if you come up with a strategy that immediately responds to that by defecting, you can get caught up in a feud. So issues were that strategies that were unresponsive to defections get taken advantage of. So if you come up against a strategy that's too nice altogether, tester can come out on top. If the first strategy is to maybe learn what's happening by cooperating 3 times in a row, what tester will do is defect in the first instance, try and capture the largest payoff. What was found is that the top strategies retaliate quickly, is that they are nice, they will cooperate, but if a defection is thrown in, they will retaliate, and will retaliate quite quickly. So the analysis suggests that sneakiness doesn't pay. If you try to throw in a couple of defections either at the start, somewhere in the middle, or towards the end, it doesn't seem to pay off. Okay, there is a short-term benefit. If you defect while the other person cooperates, they get the payoff for cheating. They get the payoff for reneging on the agreement. They are the country that pumps out huge amounts of oil while the price is high. Every other country is holding back, keeping the price up, and one country defects. So it can pay in the short run to be sneaky. But then if the agreement breaks down and you end up locked in a feud where all countries break the quotas, all participants end up defecting, you lose the benefits of cooperation. The combined benefits are lost. So entries that try to take advantage of nice strategies don't gain as much as they lose. They gain against strategies that can take advantage of, but then they lose when they come up against the hard strategies. They end up in sort of an ongoing feud where there are no benefits to cooperation. So Tranquilizer, which had lots of cooperates but threw in defects every so often, came 27th, and Tester, which did its sort of defecting early and then became tit for tat, came in 46th. So one about halfway, one about 2/3 down. All the ones at the top are the nice strategies. Don't try to take advantage of anyone. We'll cooperate and continue to cooperate as long as the other person does. We don't need to go through that. So what were the general lessons that were taken when faced with a prisoner's dilemma type situation? So what was suggested that should be, so the practice people should take if they're caught in a situation where the payoff to them is influenced by the behaviour of others? Well, the first lesson was don't be envious. So it doesn't matter if others win. It doesn't matter if others score more. So as we said, tit for tat never scores more than the other player. And it can't. The best it can do is hope to draw. And in fact, tit for tat loses about half the games it played, as we saw in the analysis on Friday. So half the time it loses. But loses high scoring games, is getting closer to 600 each and every time. Whereas Tulloch was beating opponents, but in games where the score was about 300. So if you're investing in a company, do you invest in the company that beats its rivals, but hammers its profits doing so? Or do you invest in a company that doesn't earn as much profit as its rival, but is earning twice as much as it would if it went out hammer and tongs in competition? So what do you care when you purchase a share? Do you care about the dividend you got for your purchase of Coke? Or are you looking at investors on Pepsi and saying they got a higher dividend than me? Do you want Coke and Pepsi to go into strict competition where Coke might win, but your dividend is halved? Do you want to beat Pepsi or earn as much for yourself as you can? So don't be envious. So look at getting the maximum payoffs for yourself, not whether you're beating opponents or not. The second is be nice, which is simply defined as don't defect first. So start off cooperating and continue to cooperate as long as the other person also does so. So the best way to do well is to cooperate with others who are also nice. And this leads to games that have the maximum possible score, both scoring 600 in the way Axelrod designed the competition. While you shouldn't be envious, looking at what other people get, you should be nice and cooperate first. That doesn't mean you allow yourself to be taken advantage of. If somebody defects against you, you retaliate, and you retaliate straight away. You don't allow them to build up a kind of a set of gains or build up the belief that defection works. So retaliate swiftly or others will take advantage. So don't be taken for a mug. If somebody defects against you, you defect straight away immediately back against them. And that's what tit for tat does. If you retaliate though, be prepared to forgive and forgive quite quickly. But there are mutual costs to engaging in defection. After the retaliation, go back to cooperate as quickly as you can. So prove that you won't be taken advantage of, but know that you also can go back to the benefits of cooperation. So feuds are costly. So defection shouldn't prevent cooperation later on. So get your revenge in, but move on. And then don't be too clever. So too much cleverness looks like random. There isn't actually a strategy behind it. You can write 60, 70, 80 lines of code, but is it actually achieving anything? Is there sort of something behind the strategy? So the first four are the key ones. Don't be envious, be nice, retaliate swiftly, and then forgive. And these are sort of the outcomes from the tit-for-tat strategy. There are others who suggested that in a prisoner's dilemma, that tit-for-tat is a bit too simple. That why should you only look back one period? That why should you incorporate all these things here? So there are others who said that maybe in real-life settings, we should try to augment the tit-for-tat strategy. But when it came to the computer game that Axelrod ran, tit-for-tat was the optimum strategy and the one that came out on top. So the area that he looked at it, or looked at where prisoner's dilemma type situations arose, and maybe where tit-for-tat developed, was in trench warfare. So it's almost 100 years since this was a common form of warfare. But now it tends to be guerrilla warfare, very mobile, small numbers, in, attack, get out as quickly as possible. Whereas back in the Great War, back at the start of the 20th century, it was very much stationary. Wars had fronts. The battle lines were drawn, and you dug deep trenches, 8, 10, 12 feet into the ground, and armies could be opposite each other for months at end. That it would be a very slow process. So armies in deep trenches on either side of a battle line. So machine guns with range 300-400 yards, artillery with ranges up to half a mile and beyond. So prolonged engagement with the same group of enemy troops. So even if you're 200 or 300 yards apart, you would know who is opposing you. You would get used maybe to the rota and routine that they use. So trench warfare is an iterated prisoner's dilemma. So again, the key we're looking at over the last class or two has been situations where the game is repeated. So we started sort of with just the prisoner's dilemma, 2 people taken into custody. Unless they're career criminals, will be once off. Looking at the game show situation, again it's a once-off occurrence. In real life, though, the prisoner's dilemmas can be repeated. So what are the payoffs in trench warfare? So where you cooperate with your rival and basically don't engage in a shoot-to-kill policy, that you're prepared to sit there maybe for weeks or months on end, not shooting each other, shooting over their heads, or engaging in sort of some form of cooperation, or as you'd expect in warfare, shoot to kill. So if both are shooting, well, you're going to get deaths on both sides. If both are cooperating, everybody lives. If one person is shooting and the other person is cooperating, well, if you cooperate, you die. If they're shooting, they win. Whereas if you're shooting, you live. And if they cooperate, you win. So the payoffs, again, are looked at from a prisoner's dilemma type situation. Again, it's probably not an exact prisoner's dilemma because of the sort of zero-sum game. Like if you're involved in a shoot-to-kill policy, one person is dying, one person is living. So for a single round, if it's guerrilla warfare, no matter what the enemy does, it's better to shoot to kill. If it's a single round, there are no benefits into the future. If you're never going to see that opposition again, why would you leave them survive? If you're in international fishing waters and you see a big shoal of fish, are you going to leave it there? Oh, I should leave that fish there. We want the stocks to be maintained. We don't want to be depleting overall fish stocks. You leave it there. 2 days later, another trawler comes across it and takes it out of the water. If you're involved in guerrilla warfare and you get an opportunity to kill one of the enemy, you could say, oh, I shouldn't shoot him. He might see me in 6 months' time and keep me alive. 1, he's not going to see you again. Probably doesn't know who you are. And 2, maybe in 2 or 3 days' time, he'd have the opportunity to take out one of your comrades simply because the ability for cooperation to develop hasn't occurred. Whereas in trench warfare, you're dealing with the same people the whole time. Does it pay to actually shoot the people in the trench on the far side of you if they're just going to be replaced? If 10 people are facing 10 people and you shoot 2 of theirs and they're replaced by 2 people, and then they shoot 2 of yours and they're replaced by 2 people, and you shoot 2 of theirs and they're replaced by 2 people, in 6 months' time it's still 10 opposite 10. But the original 10 are dead. Could you not just say, we're going 10 months, in 6 months' time there'll be 10 people opposite 10 here. Why not be the 10 of us that are here now? Let's stay as we are. So when looking at trench warfare, this is actually what developed. So these are actual quotes from people who were caught up in the horrendous war almost 100 years ago. So if the British shelled the Germans replied and the damage was equal. Tit for tat. A British staff officer was astonished to observe German soldiers walking about within rifle range, up out of the trench, walking behind it, within range of the rifles that the British soldiers had, wondering why on earth weren't they shooting them? Well, the German soldiers probably wanted to go and collect something, wanted to do something, wanted to get something. Just stood up and walked out. They simply knew in a couple of hours' time maybe the British soldiers wanted to get out of the trench, stuck in smelly, stank conditions, and get out and get something. And they basically gave themselves the opportunity to do it. That they could shoot each other if one person climbed out and shoot them. Then nobody would climb out. And if they wanted to get something, they could crawl along on their belly through the war fields of northern France. So it was a case of, well, we shoot each other, we crawl along on our belly, or we allow ourselves to stand up. And they allowed themselves to stand up. So some of the observations were these people did not know there was a war on. Both sides believed in live and let live. that they were battling each other, but because they were battling each other over a prolonged period, they adopted the live and let live strategy. They were cooperating with each other. So again, a quote from, I think, a British soldier. Suddenly a salvo arrived but did no damage. So an artillery shell exploded close to the enemy lines. So naturally both sides got down and our men started swearing at the Germans. So this artillery shell exploded, guns were pulled, and everyone started roaring. So when all at once a brave German got up on top of his parapet, got up out of the trench and shouted, in a war where a shell explodes, "We're very sorry about that. We hope no one was hurt. It is not our fault. It was that damned Prussian artillery, who might have been 300 or 400 yards behind from the front, might have been mobile, passing from one place to another, and maybe saw a trench a couple of hundred yards away and said, we'll lob an old shell over there. We'll be gone in 2 hours' time. What's the cost to us? We'll let the Germans deal with it." Well, the shell was launched and the Germans were aghast. "What are you bombing the British for? We're here while you're gone away." So the poor German soldier said, "Sorry lads, we won't do it again. We'll get rid of these boys from behind us." And this is in a war where they were supposed to be sworn enemies. And if you look at the Axelrod book and also the chapter from Dawkins, you'll see 2, 3, 4 times as many quotes from British and German soldiers all along the same line, that where this sort of cooperation developed. So what is the summary when it comes to these repeated prisoners' dilemmas? Well, one issue is that the prisoner's dilemma is a model for many different types of interaction. It does actually occur in real life. There's no single optimum strategy in an iterated prisoner's dilemma game. There's nothing that will guarantee you the maximum payoff. But tit for tat is strong, robust and stable. On average, tit for tat will do well. It might not do well against all opponents. In fact, it comes up against some opponents which it does quite poorly with. That it may end up in an ongoing feud if it comes up against a harsh or an unforgiving strategy, and tit for tat just continues to defect and retaliate. Tit for tat might think it's just retaliating once, but it can develop and extend for quite a prolonged period. But on average, tit for tat does quite well, and this is perhaps why some have suggested it should be augmented, that it could actually do better if you took sort of a better appreciation of what's happening around you. That scoring best on average is something, but in particular individual situations, you're not looking at the average. You're looking at how am I faring out against this particular opponent. So in Axelrod's computer games, the reason tit for tat won was because on average it scored highest. Against the other 62 opponents, it scored the highest. But in real life, we're only dealing with one. It's all well and good if you come up against one of the other nice opponents where you do score highly. Why do you come up against one of the opponents where tit for tat doesn't score quite as well? Should you just continue as you did before? In real world iterated prisoner dilemma scenarios, tit for tat like strategies naturally evolve, even among antagonists, like in warfare, and unintelligent players. So what he means by unintelligent players is in sort of biological settings, where actually creatures will cooperate with each other. So a bird cleaning the teeth of a crocodile, somebody else taking the ticks off a particular animal. So cooperation can emerge. So agent-based modelling is a powerful tool for modelling populations in social settings, like in economics, and also in biological settings. And the key issue that sort of Axelrod looked at is why does cooperation evolve? And why does it evolve in iterated prisoner's dilemma situations? What is different between a once-off game and a repeated game? In a once-off game, you should always cheat. There is no disputing that. In a once-off game, you should always cheat. But in a repeated game, there is the benefit from long-term cooperation. So what Axelrod said was in iterated games, your actions cast a shadow on the future. What you do now affects the outcome subsequently. In a once-off game, there is no shadow of the future. You're dealing with a person on a once-off situation. You should try to earn as much as you can now. If it's a repeated game, your actions cast a shadow on the future, or a shadow of the future. This explains some forms of cooperation, doesn't explain all of them. So when it comes to interrelationships between customers and suppliers, between firms collaborating on research projects, between companies competing in markets, between companies looking at their advertising budgets, between the countries of OPEC, there clearly is a shadow of the future. In trench warfare, there was a shadow of the future. You start going gung-ho and shooting as many Germans as you can find, you can be pretty sure they're going to turn around and shoot as many British soldiers as they can see. That your actions have long-term consequences. So it's the shadow of the future that leads to cooperation. But it doesn't explain everything. There are systems that we cooperate with that don't have long-run consequences. One simple example is tipping in restaurants. Particularly in restaurants you're never going to visit again. So there's a system built up where you pay 5, 10, 15% of the bill in a tip to the service staff. It's sort of a voluntary system that has evolved. Does not tipping in a restaurant have a cost for the individual? What does the customer gain by tipping? By leaving 10% of the bill? Are they going to get better service? Well, if they're dinner eating. Are they going to get a better table? They've already been seated. They may never be good to visit that restaurant again. They may never deal with that waiter again. Yet they may leave a 10% tip. And this is a system that has evolved where people cooperate with this voluntary system. So clearly there are other issues at play that lead to cooperation to emerge. Surely it'd be in all customers' interests not to leave a tip. You want everybody else to leave a tip so that the restaurant stays open and the staff are paid. But you yourself, you don't want to pay. You want them to cooperate and you to defect. But in the vast majority of cases, people cooperate with it. So there does seem to be sort of a more social dimension to it than picked up in the computer games of Axelrod. Then why do people cooperate with it? Well, one reason is because everybody else does it. That it's part of society, that it's not so much about looking out for yourself, that it is sort of built in to the way society operates. So in some countries, like the pay for waiting staff is hugely weighted towards tips. That unless they get tips, they don't get paid at all. So it's sort of observed as payment for the service. Whereas in Ireland, waiting staff could be on 8, 9, 10 euro an hour. And the tip is on top of that. And depending on how the tip is distributed. But yet again, the vast majority of people would cooperate with it. The tax system requires cooperation. This time of year, people are submitting their tax returns. The revenue commissioners don't go to any individual taxpayer and tell them how much to pay. So last Friday would have been the pay and file deadline if you were doing it by paper, and 2 weeks after that, Friday week I think, would be the pay and file deadline if you're doing it online. So on either day, last Friday you'd have sent a cheque to the revenue commissioners, or by Friday week you'll be doing an electronic transfer. But the revenue commissioners aren't asking each taxpayer, or aren't telling, each taxpayer how much they owe. The Irish income tax system, and all tax system, is self-assessed. Just like somebody in a restaurant decides how much of a tip to give. Somebody paying tax decides how much tax to pay. Why would you pay the right amount of tax? Why would you cooperate with the system? Revenue commissioners have at most 300 employees. There could be 2.5 million taxpayers in Ireland. It is physically impossible for them to check even a large fraction of those. If they were to check 10% of them, you're talking 250,000 tax returns. And that's just from people, the mine companies, etc. So they simply can't check them. If you submit a tax return to the revenue, the odds are it won't be checked. So how does the government collect tax? Again, it's like tipping. Why would you pay tax? Well, again, there are a number of reasons. One, if you feel everybody else is cooperating. If the system actually works. Are you the only fool in the village? Is everybody else fiddling their tax books while you're paying the full amount? Is the government using the money some way effectively? Are you just building it so they can build mansions for themselves or go on foreign holidays? or are they actually providing services? So you will cooperate if other people are cooperating, the money is being used effectively. Can they actually catch cheaters? Is it a case of pay your tax, and if you didn't, what about it? Is there punishment for cheaters? So in restaurants, there really is no punishment, unless it's a place you want to return to time and time again. When it comes to tax, we expect you to pay each and every year. If you don't pay, what's the punishment? So in general, there are punitive fines and interests if you don't pay the correct amount of tax and you're caught. Of course, the issue is the chance of getting caught is quite low, unless you're in high-risk industries. So the Revenue Commissioners do target their resources. They only have a couple of hundred staff, so they do target particular areas. There's very little benefit for the Revenue Commissioners checking the income tax of UCC staff, because we're PAYE, pay as you earn. The tax is taken from our gross pay, and UCC gives the tax to the Revenue Commissioners to try and ease the paperwork. A lot of workers are PAYE, so they don't spend much time on enforcement in that sector. But in the self-employed sector, they'll target the enforcement. And then maybe at sectors where tax payment should be quite high, maybe where earnings are quite high, or maybe where VAT and excise duty should be quite high. So target the enforcement where it should work. So people will cooperate if they feel that people that are caught will actually be punished for it. And the big issue is you can get away with not paying tax. The chances of being caught are quite low. But if they do catch you, they'll stick you to the wall. They'll charge you an interest rate that'll see the amount balloon up. They'll charge you a fine backdated to the amount the tax was due, put interest on that and cause that to balloon up. You might have had a 20 grand tax bill. I'll evade that. They catch you 5 years later and they're looking for 80 grand. And you're going, Jesus, 20 grand? Why are you now looking for 80 grand? Well, they'll say there was 10% interest per year. There was a 20 grand fine. There was 10% interest on top of that. Interest on the interest. We want 80 grand now. And you're saying, well, really was it worth my while? So then people looking at that will say, at least they're punishing those who tried to cheat the system. So the cooperation can emerge in different settings, where again it's a prisoner's dilemma. I have the incentive to cheat. I don't want to participate or cooperate. I want everybody else to pay their tax. But if I feel that I'm being taken advantage of, the system would break down. Where has the system broken down? All countries have self-assessed taxes, and countries can't go around telling people how much tax to pay. What country is broke? Greece. Why is Greece broke? They don't pay tax. The system has broken down. Like, Greeks are no different to Irish people. Like, people are essentially the same, but they're obviously operating in a different system. Why don't Greek people pay tax?
Because there's no penalty, or there's no follow-up.
Yeah, there's no penalty, you won't get caught, and nobody else is doing it. Why be the only fool in Greece? So they don't pay tax because the system has broken down. It's kind of like a threshold level. If you reach a certain threshold level where everybody is participating, the system sort of becomes self-fulfilling and holds up and maintains. So in Ireland, we haven't seen a collapse in tax revenue because of non-compliance. We've simply seen a collapse in tax revenue because of a collapse in income. People aren't earning and spending as much. The amount of tax revenue is collapsing because the economy is collapsing. Although it has, in a sense, stabilised over the last while. In Greece, there was never the tax revenue there to collect it in the first place. So there has been analysis done of the tax collected in Greece. Half of GPs, which we wouldn't consider to be part of the poorer section of society, report an income of €12,000 per annum in Greece. Half of them are earning the exact same amount. Could there be any significance to the figure €12,000? If you earn €12,000, you pay no tax. If you earn above €12,000, you pay tax. So they are declaring income right on the tax threshold. Do they think they'll be audited? Do they think someone will check? Do they think they'll have to pay? No. So same people facing or acting with the same self-interest, but completely different outcomes. In one system, the cooperation emerges. In one system, the cooperation breaks down. Are Greeks any different to Irish people? Not necessarily. But if you look at where the system starts from, you can get different outcomes. And Greece is about to find out. some of the costs of that. So we'll leave it at that for today, and we'll take it up with risk and uncertainty on Friday.